Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on this Wednesday morning, evening rather. It's a chilly evening in the middle of winter in South Africa. But things are obviously heating up right across the entire world. And we've seen 2024, a year of elections right across many parts around the world. We've seen it in South Africa. We've seen the outcome. There have been a number of surprises. We've also seen the elections take place in India and other parts around the world. Last week, I'm not too sure whether it's come as a surprise or whether it was expected. We've seen the centre left Labour Party celebrating a huge win over the long ruling Conservative Party. And on Sunday, we've seen France, we've seen a rejection of the far right populist party in France. And looking ahead, we are looking at the United States of America, the up and coming elections, and are there going to be lessons for the United States of America from following the results and the outcome of the French and British elections? Now, this also begs a question with regard to democracy. And we are talking about Western style democracy. And over the years, there have been huge questions that have been raised with regards to democracy in general and the fallacy of Western style democracy. And let us remember that this is a democracy that is working very, very hard to be imposed on countries right across the world. We've seen it in the Middle East, we see it in Africa, we see it in Latin America, and we see it in many other parts around the world. But just looking at this pendulum in this democracy, we've seen massive swings at one point in time. We've seen a right-wing government springing up right across the entire world. Now we are starting to see this whole center-left and to the left of the political spectrum, and all this playing out right in front of our very eyes. The key questions here is democracy as an ideology. Just, how much confidence or how much can we rely on democracy, and is democracy really what it says it is? Now, these are some of the issues that we will be unpacking tonight with our panelists, and we've got a power pack panel tonight with us. We've got Mark Glenn from The Ugly Truth. We've got Professor Nidal, Sakr, March for Justice out of the United States of America. And also locally, we've got Ashraf Patel, the Institute for Global Dialogue. So let's welcome our panelists this evening right here on Salam Media, as we welcome our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media this evening. Right on top of the screen, Mark Glenn, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on.
Right, and Ashraf Patel to you as well. Assalamu alaikum. If you could unmute, please, Ashraf.
Wa alaikum salam. Hope you all well. Thank you.
And Professor Nidal Sakr, March for Justice Chairperson. Assalamu alaikum to you, Prof.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's always a pleasure to be with you, brother.
Prof, I see your video is off. Are you going to do it on audio?
Actually, I don't know what's happening with the connection here. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you loud and clear. We can hear you loud and clear. Right, Mark. Let's start off with you, and obviously we are going to unpack this fallacy of democracy, particularly Western-style democracy, against what we see playing out in the political landscape right across the entire world. And I mentioned a few countries. We've even seen in India, where we've seen this right-wing fascist government of Narendra Modi losing ground. We see it now in the UK. We've seen it in France, where this popular right-wing party, everyone thought that, especially in a country like France, where we've seen right-wing politics play a very, very dominant role in the political landscape in this country. But just looking at these results, and clearly they are telling us a story, they are telling us of a picture that is starting to emerge. So just as an introduction, just your thoughts, and we'll go around the panel just to get an introductory comment, and we'll take the discussion further from there.
Sure. I think the first thing that we should keep in mind is that when we talk about these big swings, either to the far right or to the far left, the swings are not as big as people would like to imagine that they are. Pretty much policies, especially foreign policy, and I'm talking mainly about the United States here, but certainly by extension, Europe as well, Western Europe. Foreign policy stays the same. So in many ways, these changing of the face of the governments, as we just saw took place in the UK and in France, in many ways, this is a song and dance that is done in order to make the people themselves believe that that they really do live in a democratic system and that their vote matters, that their voice matters. And then, of course, it's something that the West uses to lecture and even to bludgeon other countries around the world about their own superiority, that they are democracies and that the people have power over their governments as opposed to, these backward third world countries. I'm using that in quotation marks because this is the implicit picture that the West tries to paint, that these backward third worlders, they have no democracy, they live under autocracy. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying before about these swings, the swings are not as big as you might imagine them to be, or as they appear to be on the surface. If you look at the actual policies, yes, there's a lot of talk, but when it comes to changing the walk of things, and especially foreign policy, very little changes. I mean, you look at what just took place in France, and you look at what took place in the UK. And as of right now, the new UK Prime Minister is meeting with Joe Biden at the very moment that the US is hosting this NATO get-together of gangsters from NATO. And Starmer has already said that he's going to make sure that the UK's investment, as they refer to it, in NATO will remain the same. And there's no other way to look at what NATO means right now other than World War III with Russia. So what I would say here is, and please forgive me for the very what the comparison I'm going to make here. Imagine a prostitute that has an assortment of different colored wigs. She's got blonde, she's got brunette, she's got redheaded wigs, and she'll wear whichever wig she has to wear in order to attract or please her customer. And I see this in our election system in the West in much the same way, that they will change their wigs, but the prostitute remains the same. Again, my apologies for having to use such banal language, banal comparison, but I think that's the best way to do it.
Well, Mark, in fact, I don't think, in any way, it would be deemed offensive, because I think it's obviously a very, very clear analogy. And you forgot to mention the orange wig. You forgot to mention the orange wig.
The orange one, yeah, and the purple and the pink and the green as well, yes. Yeah. I just didn't want to get too graphic.
Prof. Nidal, here's a question for you. And obviously, this is quite interesting what Mark is saying, because it is clear that democracy calls to attention for us to understand the true meaning of democracy. There is obviously an enormous difference between true democracy and also, when one talks about democracy, it is about government of the people, by the people, for the people, and all these dynamics that actually engulf us. But in the true sense of the word, this is not a government of the people, because these governments are controlled by political parties, by a very, very small number of people as well. If you could unmute your mic, please, Prof.
Okay. Democracy is just like beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And the interpretation of what democracy is and the application from one environment to the other differs greatly depending on so many factors and variables. But mostly goes back to the ruling institution, what's the establishment, and what makes the establishment in each environment, and how deep-rooted that establishment is. So we see democracy, for example, as quote-unquote established democracies, as we see, for example, in Western Europe and in the US, but we see also quote unquote transitional democracies as we witness in South Africa and some of the newly emerging democracies. We've seen actually democracy, for example, like in Egypt during the Arab Spring, the short-lived democracy for that matter. And all of these, what we call democratic experiences or examples, none of them lives up to the true claim of democracy, as you mentioned, for the people, by the people, and to the people. But nonetheless, when it comes to the West in particular, that claims moral superiority and civilization, we see actually the worst form of abuse of having democracy as almost like a label on a sticker that they monopolize, and that's exclusive to them. When in fact, actually, it's probably like abused more than any other place in the world. But you know, it's an experience. You know, it has its benefits, it has its drawbacks, it has its lessons. But quite often, whenever you hear the word democratic, then you know that's basically whoever is raising that banner is most likely going to be the least representative of such slogan. What we see right now in the West, I think, is very, very interesting. I think the example that we've seen, or the latest development that we've seen in the UK, I think is remarkably different than what we see in France. And I suspect that it's going to be actually remarkably different on what's going to happen in the US. I think the vote in the UK, mostly just like Mark said, did not have as much to do with foreign policy as much as with the economy and some other internal matters in the UK, and people being fed up with the conservatives for the last 14 years. In France, it's probably slightly different because the immigration or immigrants and the racism towards them was a big factor. We've seen that between the first round and the second round when, let's say, Kylian Mbappe and others came speaking out against the right that was expected to have landslide victory and did not pan out. I suspect that because people came out speaking out about the danger to the the fabric of the French society that's mostly made of immigrants as we speak. So in the US, I think it's going to be very much different because the establishment here in the US is mostly two parties. There is nothing else, unlike France or UK. And I think like the quote unquote disrupting factors or the factors that played in upsetting or offsetting the political landscape in each of those countries, UK and France, is not what we have in the US. It's completely different mechanism here and things at play. But nonetheless, I think like the next election is going to be very interesting here in the US in terms of it's going to be, or at least like being so close, which is, I know it's only like about 5 months left, but there are so many things that are still up in the air. I'm a firm believer that come November, we might not even have the two candidates that we expect to be on the ballot, namely Trump and Joe Biden. I think we might see something that's completely different by then.
Shukran for that, Professor Nidal, and let's bring Ashraf in. Ashraf, are you surprised at what you see playing out in the UK and in France? And also taking a look at our very own example, because we've recently come out of elections and there were somewhat surprises. And for the very first time, we in South Africa are now having a government which is a coalition government of ideologies, of contrasting ideologies.
Yes. I think flowing from what fellow panelists are saying, look, 2024 is a huge election year. It's a bonanza year for elections. And elections are a very expensive exercise. The elections in India alone costed about $10 billion, etc. And what colleagues are saying is resonant in a sense that modern day electoral politics essentially is very much rooted in kind of big money. And we've seen that in the South African election, at least. as well as the Indian election. So, flowing from that logic, yes, there is that kind of critique that elections, particularly in the global south, are very much rooted in the power blocks, in big the land owning classes, particularly in South Africa, the financial classes. You see it in Brazil, South Africa, India. These are huge nations of the developing South. I think the European elections are much more nuanced. I'll start with the UK election. I think colleagues have spoken that yes, it has been definitely more about 14 years of Conservative Party elitism that has really eroded the public good. I mean, if you were to go to the UK today, I can tell you it's not much different from cities that you see in South Africa. There's been underfunding of infrastructure. There hasn't been any large scale infrastructure investment in the UK for a decade. There's been no social housing. So you've had 10 years of no social housing. And I think the domestic and particularly the erosion of the National Health Service in the UK and the lack of social housing and inflation, those has really pushed the vast electorate towards the kind of a big win for the Labour. So yes, that has been, I would say, 100, almost 100% about domestic issues and the elitism of the Conservatives, who's just lost the plot completely. I think France is much more nuanced, very interesting. I think one political analyst said, you know, democracy and elections, in depending on which country it is, does produce unintended outcomes. And the French result is quite surprising, but I think against the backdrop of a very strong kind of social justice tradition in France, especially noting, the memories of World War II, the 30s, when France was occupied by fascism. I think the rally or the left, the National Front, were quite innovative in mobilizing society uh, around those concerns of the dangers of kind of the right. But what's interesting is both the kind of national rally, the right, as well as the National Front, the left, both of them have mobilized society in a massive way, with almost 60% turnout, is unheard of in France. And that talks to a backlash against the mainstream. Now, the leaders like Macron and Biden and others in Western democracies occupy the mainstream. And mainstream, I mean, if we dissect the term, it's particularly about neoliberal democracy. And I think both the left and the right in France are kind of pushing back against neoliberal democracy. And they're putting national economic interest, issues around the pension fund, around the taking away the subsidies for fuel to the farmers. That was a huge push and major mistake that the Macron administration made, all in the name of the green and decarbonization economy. So all these factors have intersected, and at the very center for the right is identity and immigration. So you put those together, they all talk about the lack of a state or nation state in regulating its affairs, and neoliberalism cannot solve any of those major crises. So yes, it's different in the UK, different in France, but it is about a mainstream, a backlash against the mainstream elites, and more specifically the urban elites.
Shukran for that, Ashraf. And let's bring Mark back into the discussion. Mark, just trying to understand the psyche and the mindset of voters in a democracy, or people who believe in a democracy. And this is important to understand, this whole notion of democracy, how much of this notion of democracy in recent times is centered around people, is centered around individuals. Because we see the same faces over and over again. I just spoke about Macron. We see Biden and Trump again, Trump making a comeback. And we see it right across the entire world as if, people just want to hold on to power all the time. And do voters, do people, do the masses actually realize what they are getting into by voting for these individuals or personalities rather than voting for true democracy?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's a very good question. And I think it's important that we distinguish between citizens living in democracies in the West, including America, versus citizens living in democracies in other parts of the world. And I'm sure that Professor Sakr would agree with me on this, is that when you're dealing with Americans, you are dealing with just an exceptionally uninformed group of people when it comes to politics. Usually they will seize on to one or two big issues, and that's the 360-degree arc of their political understanding of things, whether it's uh, whether it's more money in their pockets, whether it's gun control, pro or against, whether it's abortion, whether it's the environment, and so Ashraf used a good term in describing what happened in France, where he said that it was more nuanced. There really is no nuance in America when it comes to the average citizen and his or her investment in politics. They spend more time. I hate to say this. They spend more time reading the posts on their Facebook page in a day than they will spend in a year thinking about political matters. So I think it's important that we make this distinction between the people of the West and other people around the world. Now, of course, the power brokers love this situation, especially here in America, where the average American doesn't pay really any attention, doesn't take a microscope and examine the politics of his or her nation. They love a situation like that because then it's easy to herd people, meaning to move people like livestock in whatever direction that you need them to go. So, as I said, I think it's important that we understand that. And we also have to understand how dangerous this is. If we think back to 9/11 and what had just happened, and then we had this idiot for a president named George W. Bush, and we had the entire nation, the most powerful nation in the world in terms of military, in terms of economy, one nation that could destroy the entire planet if it chose to. And so the entire nation, both on the left and on the right, they're looking for answers. Why did this happen? Why did these people do this to us? And so this idiot for a president, George W. Bush, goes in front of the entire nation, the entire world, and he said they did this because they hate us for our freedom. And the American people believed it. Okay, they didn't question this. They didn't approach this with any degree of skepticism. And we went to war and destroyed Iraq, destroyed the Middle East. It expanded to Libya and that the destruction of that country, and then of course everything that we see taking place now. So this is a very dangerous thing. Ashraf used the word abuse as well. I think it was Ashraf, if I'm not correct on that, please forgive me, but talked about the manner in which the term democracy is abused, and it is used to not just bludgeon and oppress other countries around the world, meaning the United States says, and the West in general, well, we are a democracy, therefore we have this sense of moral superiority to you, and we're going to go into your countries and we're going to destroy them by war. We're going to destroy them through economic sabotage, and we can get away with this because of our moral superiority as democracies. And of course, it's also an abuse against the people living in those countries of the West themselves, because they have no idea how they're being dragged into something that is just purely evil under the sanctifying um, guise of democracy. I don't know if that answered your question specifically in Inayet. Is that how you say your name, Inayet? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes,
It was the
it
first
is
time. I
Inayet.
know
That's
Wadi. I
fine,
knew
Mark.
Wadi means. Okay, yeah. I don't know if that answered your question. I do have a tendency to ramble on. I apologize.
No, that's fine. In fact, I will get to the issue. The issue I also raised with you was about personalities and about the same faces over and over again. But we definitely will touch on that. But just to bring Professor Nidal back into the discussion, and Mark spoke about, in general, he spoke about American society and their lack of knowledge of politics in general. Spending more time on Facebook rather than focusing on politics. But this is a general problem, I think, in many parts around the world. And all of this, Professor Nidal, and I think when one goes back and one looks at campaigning, now campaigning is a very, very expensive process. We've seen billions right across the entire world spent on campaigning for elections. But again, there is this perversion about political campaigning. And to make matters worse, we see how campaigning has a corrosive effect on the people, on the candidates as well. It is more, Professor Nidal, like a training course, which is in the art of deception and obviously misdirection as well, rather than integrity, rather than making a firm commitment in the interest of the public or public interest.
Well, I think the US right now is going through a very interesting period because, as Mark said, political campaigning and funding is a key factor, of course. And we know that, for example, like Biden right now is, I think, the thing that's going to push him to step down is actually that many sponsors or fundraisers or donors to the Democratic Party, actually they're using their money to leverage the Democratic Party to put forth another candidate. It goes without saying that the American electorate or the American voter is one of the most uninformed and gullible voters around the world. There is no question about it. And what Mark said about the American voters being soundbite type of voters is absolutely true. However, if we look at the electorate map in the US, we cannot ignore the fact that roughly, according to most estimates, that number one, that foreign policy takes like really very low priority in terms of the voters' decision. I think one of the numbers that came up that it counts for no more than 17% in terms of how important it is. But also, like we find, like for example, like the electorate map or landscape in the US, where supposedly 40% of the voters are Republicans, and you get roughly about 45 to 50% maybe Democrats, and then the rest are going to be independent. But when you look at the right, which is the Republican ones, these are actually the ones that are probably least, let's say, informed and the easiest to mobilize, because they follow basically mostly the platform, regardless of the merit or the content or the truth behind their political agenda. But on the left, which is the Democratic base, we find that there is like great variety. So you have much of the, for example, like the encampments that we've seen, the student movement that we've seen on the university campuses, would most like, kind of like ally with the, or identify with the left and maybe like more closer to the Democratic base. The independents are also like, they seem to be probably like the most informed among all the three. But nonetheless, if you look at the US today and how like the war on Gaza has really energized the bases, and the indications that we see from the students and the protests, the relentless protests on the streets now 10 months on, it gives a very clear indication to how the future generations in the US are more likely to be a little bit more independent, a little bit more political savvy, a little bit more informed and effective participants.
Yes, Prof. Nidal. Ashraf, yes, if you'd like to just come in as well, and perhaps just a comment from your side in terms of the pervasive consequences, as a result of elections, and particularly when one places a lot of reliance on individuals. Now, I know you sent me an article with regard to Joe Biden and his performance as far as the debates, as the presidential debates have gone, and obviously he's come horribly short there as well. But also, it's at the end of the day, holding on to power. We've seen it here in South Africa, where one of the criticism has been looking at the cabinet at this point in time, made up of pensioners as well. And, these are people that just want to hold on to power all the time.
Yes, definitely. I think 2024, with so many elections in 1 year, is also an inflection point, where certain issues, we all know there's an unfair global system, issues of trade, jobs, climate change are huge issues, and they are intergenerational issues. And there is intergenerational anxiety, and the French election, or EU elections especially, exhibit what is called the anxiety that's rooted in the two most potent forces in politics today, and that is identity and immigration. And with the Brexit, the phenomena of Trump, and the national rally in France and in Italy, identity and immigration are at the very center of politics, and they are shaping the resurgence of nationalist parties. I think that is the big theme of 2024. Although the left front won the most votes in France, but the national rally did quite well in terms of its own historical levels. They at their highest, and they won the most seats in their own history. So it's not as if they didn't do well. They did quite well. It's actually the corrosion of the center that has seen the left and right flanks take center stage in France, and that is a rejection of deregulation. So whether it's a resurgent left that wants the state to play a more active role in economic policy making, whether it's trade, tariffs, pensions, etc., pension reforms, or whether it's the right which is putting identity at the center because they do fear that with unchecked immigration, their language and culture is being eroded. So they mobilized around that, but they're also raising very core concerns that the left has traditionally raised, and that is around deregulation, around skills, around the state of their pension system, their health system. So the social welfare state has been probably the best a kind of what Europe could offer the world, has been this post-World War II social welfare, social market system. And in the last decade or two, that has been dismantled to such an extent where those that benefited in the previous generation, the new generation will not have that kind of social market or social welfare system. And that is the pushback. Whether it's from the left or the right, they want to reimagine or revert to core elements of that. But you have a problem because there's a huge, especially in Europe, there's a massive demographic shift. And that means white Europe, traditional Europe, is aging. Most of them are in pension age. And they need immigrants. Countries like Germany and France, or especially Germany and others, need at least 1 million immigrants a year for the industries. And so immigration, integration are going to be the big issues for Europe, and in the US to a lesser extent, but that will be politicized at the borders, especially with Mexico, etc. So I still see immigration identity as the defining features going forward, and how the political system or elites manage this responsibly so that everyone is accommodated. And I think democracy has the mechanisms to somehow create a win-win for all, because you do need immigrants, but you also need immigrants to integrate in a certain way. And this is the big issues that Europe is facing. France has failed dismally in its model vis-a-vis Germany. So yes, nuance is a key word, Mark. I believe if you compare Europe, it's not hegemonic. France is a different model of immigration that has failed. UK's model is failing, but the German model seems to be more successful. They have a better system of resourcing and absorbing immigrants, etc., etc. So it's important to try and understand where this is going. The US is different because it's so politicized, especially the border with Mexico. So I think these would be the big issues for elections, especially in Europe and in the US.
Well, thank you for that, Ashraf. Gentlemen, we're going to go for a quick ad break. We're going to put you on hold. We'll be back.
Searching for elite local and international investment and advisory services from an award-winning firm? Look no further than the Belmont Mayer Group, your gateway to unparalleled investment and wealth management. At Belmont Mayer, we believe in the art of wealth creation, a meticulous process fueled by our unwavering commitment to excellence. With a focus on providing elite alternative investments and quality advice, we also pride ourselves on maximizing value for our esteemed investors, as seen through our consistent outperformance. Your financial success is our top priority. Join us at Belmont Mayer and experience the difference firsthand. Ready to embark on a journey of greatness? Contact us today. Reach out to the Belmont Mayer Group on 078 786 1698. Call or WhatsApp or email us at info@belmontmayer.com. Elevate your financial future with Belmont Mayer, where every detail matters.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
After the recent attacks on Gaza, many families have been displaced with their homes left destroyed. Through your donations, our teams are on the ground in Gaza, providing support and delivering necessary aid to families affected. The people of Gaza need your help. Give hope. Donate today to Penny Appeal South Africa. www.pennyappeal.org.za 031 1100 573.
We are here on the ground with Penny Appeal organizations in Gaza.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness. And every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and free zakat calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
Dad, these Frymax chips are so tasty. Wow, that really takes me back. My dad bought me a Frymax chips every day after school. They were my favorite when I was your age as well. Quality is at the very heart of what we do, And that's why we ensure that every Frymax packet is filled with the beautiful goodness and flavor-packed taste that you've come to expect from us since 1982. Frymax, from generation to generation.
Attention drivers, revamp your ride with top quality tires at Best Drive Bromfontein. Our seasoned technicians guarantee a perfect fit for a smooth, safe journey. Choose from premium brands to budget-friendly options, all at competitive prices with special offers. From tire installations to brakes and shocks, we have all your vehicle needs covered. We also specialize in wheels, batteries, and suspension repairs. Get to meet our hands-on director, Mohammed Desai. With over 3 decades of experience, he ensures you receive exceptional service. Enjoy Salah facilities and a complimentary tea or coffee while you wait. Don't compromise on safety and performance. Ample parking available and full-time security on premises. Visit Best Drive Bromfontein today or call 011 837 4000 or 5000. We are 1 kilometer off the M1 highway. Take the Smith Street off-ramp towards Fordsburg, Fitas. Best Drive Bromfontein, where excellence meets service.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Well, we continue our discussion tonight on Wednesday nights with myself, Inayet Wadee, in the company of our panelists taking a look at the UK, French, and US elections, talking about the fallacy of democracy. My guest tonight, Mark Glenn, The Ugly Truth, Professor Nidal, Sakr, March for Justice, and Ashraf Patel, Institute for Global Dialogue. Mark, just to continue with the discussion, now there's a famous saying that says, those who control the options control the outcome. And this is a travesty, which is actually working, because we have been taught to believe that political parties are right, they are inevitable. And also at the same time, we've also learned that they actually pervert politics, because many of these institutions are profoundly undemocratic and also raising unscrupulous people to public office by controlling the options that we as the people have or are allowed to actually vote on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, again, it's important that we make our distinctions here. You know, when we talk about the fallacy of democracy, democracy in and of itself is a good thing, as long as it's done in the way that is intended. It's a good thing. When we talk about the fallacy of democracy as it exists today, principally in the West, and yes, and what you're saying is very true. Throughout history, we're always taught, that you can see a tyrant coming from a mile away. He's this giant monster with blood and flesh hanging off of his teeth. In the West, they have become very clever over the centuries in masking these tyrants, making them appear to be humanitarian. Just look at the people who run our governments, and it's not just the national government, but the state governments as well. And you're right, power attracts the worst sort of people. And one of the things that I say often here in the United States is that if Jesus Christ were to return to the United States and he would run for president, he would never make it. Even by the Christians themselves, because as soon as he started speaking out against, for example, the genocide that's taking place in Gaza, if he started telling people that they are complicit, that they have blood on their hands in the fact that they have allowed their votes and their taxpayer money to fund this godless genocide, this godless carnage, he'd never be. They would deal with him the same way that the Jews of Jesus's time dealt with him back then. So again, as I said, I think it's important that we make this distinction. But the problem is, I really do believe, as much as imagine for a moment that one day there's tapping at your front door, and you open it up, and there's this little baby alligator, and it's sitting there, and he says, "Can I come in? It's dangerous for me outside. Let me in. I won't cause any trouble, and I'll make sure that all of the bugs, that your house is clean of bugs, because I'll eat them." Well, the homeowner allows the alligator to come in without thinking about the fact that the alligator is going to grow, it's going to get bigger, And then eventually the day is going to come when the alligator is no longer content with eating the insects in the house. So at the end of the day, when the alligator has gotten so big that you can't get it out of the house now, and it's devouring everybody inside, at the end of the day, you can't blame the alligator. You have to blame the homeowner who believed the lies that the alligator was telling him as just a little alligator, a little baby. And in that same sense, especially in the West, if the people themselves actually took a principled investment, a concern for their investment, and especially for their children, and they said, you know, we can't have this continue on anymore. Our quality of life is eroding, and we're sitting at the precipice of World War III, where we may have to send here in the United States not just our sons but now our daughters off to fight, so that these unscrupulous leaders can get rich and they can become more powerful. The problem is that, especially here in America, we're dealing with a group of people whose minds have been colonized. Okay, they believe that they're free. They believe that they're the best people, the best country in the world, and this, in and of itself, this narcotic of this betterness, this supremacy. This is what keeps them from taking a vested interest in their politics, because they see it as one of these situations where it just is self-regulating and it'll always fix itself. It may need a little bit of cleaning here and there, but any kind of major overhauls, for example, you know, ripping the whole engine out and starting over again, because we Americans think that that because of our strength, that somehow it's a self-regulating and self-maintaining system. This is the problem. And you know, for people such as myself and all of you esteemed guests here today, who do take a more closer investment in the politics, it's very hard to have this conversation with our fellow Americans whose immediate response to something like that is, what are you talking about? Everything's fine here. If I can just end with one more quick thing here, I know I've been going on. On one of my trips to Iran, I was speaking to a group of journalism students at the university, and I told them, you know, they were marveling over the fact that I came from the United States, where we had freedom of speech and all of the rest of that. And I said, listen, we don't have freedom of speech in the sense that you think that we do. I said, in order to have the kinds of conversations that we're having here today, I have to travel to the other side of the world, because I can't have these conversations in my own country. Okay, maybe I won't be thrown into prison, but I will be marginalized. I will be closed out of discussions. And I told them, I said, you know, there's an old saying that the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. I said, my country is just like Gaza. Now, our infrastructure functions. We have roads, we have running water, we have electricity, but the minds of the people themselves, the hearts and minds and souls of the people, have been destroyed. It's like a scene from one of these zombie movies where people just wander around aimlessly without knowing who they are, what they're doing. And so this is the real challenge for all of us, is how do we wake people up? How do we get them to rediscover their humanity and their intelligence? And it's a very daunting thing, as all of you I know would be able to testify on your own regard. It's just how do you wake up people who don't want to be woken up?
Yes, and Professor Nidal, I recall during the height of the genocide in Gaza, and at that point in time, we also spoke looking ahead at elections that were going to be taking place right across the entire world, and what sort of impact the genocide in Gaza, and the point that you had made is Gaza will obviously be changing the entire world. And when one looks at the stories that are emerging out of these elections, we were actually hoping and we wanted to actually see, you know, what impact a crisis in that part of the world, or the genocide in that part of the world would have on Western society in general. And Ashraf will concur with us that here in South Africa, Palestine was a major issue in the build-up to the elections. There was always a talk about the lucrative Muslim vote in South Africa as a result of Palestine. There were road shows that had taken place in the build-up to the elections with the international relations minister. So all of that was playing out in South Africa. And I'm not too sure in the West, in the UK, in France, and also in the United States of America, with Palestine and foreign policy in general. How is that playing out?
Well, I'll talk about France and UK in brief. We know that some of the first statements that came from the winning parties in France and in UK, that they both talked about possibly recognizing Palestinian state, and maybe like some sort of revision to the support of Israel policies and arm supply and this kind of thing. So no, actually Palestine was front and center in terms of the first statements that came out from the French left and the Labour Party in UK. In the US is very interesting actually, because as I said, when you look at the electorate map, we have like roughly more or less committed Republicans on the right, about 40% of the votes, and maybe committed 40% of Democrats on the other side, and you have maybe like 10% toss-up independents and maybe 10% non-committed Democrats. But here's the interesting thing, is that in terms of the U.S. economy, which is the major factor in electoral vote or like voting decisions, there's no question about that. The U.S. economy is not in good shape. And regardless to what they claim from the employment figures and others, and the inflation figures that quite often are doctored, the average American just does not feel that the economy has been really working for them, which is the major issue for voting. But it took only Supreme Court vote last week or the week before, given Trump basically complete immunity against decisions that he made when he was in the office, particularly when it came to January 6th. That also was a major blow for Republicans, and I think that's what made it like really a toss-up between the two. What's more interesting right now is I remember we had earlier spoken about the impact of Gaza on U.S. elections, and I'm still a firm believer that instead of wasting everybody's time talking about the day after the war of what's happening in Gaza and who's going to be in office, I can very confidently actually declare that Al-Sinwar most likely will have much bigger say on who is the next U.S. president than the other way around as it comes to Gaza. And I think the way that the war is going to be managed, and is being managed in terms of militarily, in the form of the very effective resistance eroding into quote-unquote Israel military might on one hand, and the political war that we have right now in terms of negotiation and the outcome of negotiation. I think come November, we will have different situation where we will have so many developments in the ground that would really play towards a candidate that's a little bit seen as more balanced and less Zionist or pro-Zionist in terms of the American candidates. I believe that anyone who's going to be replacing Joe Biden, if that turns out to be the case, I think most likely is going to come out as the clear winner. I guarantee you that this candidate is not going to be as openly pro-Zionist as Joe Biden is. And the important here, the quote-unquote, is clearly or openly a pro-Zionist. The chances are that he might be just as bad, but nonetheless, maybe not as outspoken in terms of support of Israel.
Yes, Professor Nidal, and Ashraf, to bring you back into the discussion. Now, Ashraf, I know you've got a keen interest on what is taking place in the global south. And we've always been talking about the global south versus the global north, and looking at the global south and looking at the outcomes of these elections, what has happened in Britain, what has happened in France, and also looking ahead at America, and what the likely outcome is going to be. How important is this for the global south?
Yes, thank you, Inayet, thank you, colleagues. Look, the global south is a kind of a terminology kind of describing generally the previously colonized world. But within the global south, there's various levels of contestation, and it's by no means hegemonic. But as the developing world, or if you like, more specifically, the non-aligned movement, of which countries like South Africa, India, Brazil are part of, this is the progressive global south, and they looking for a better deal for the vast majority of the world's populations. And the platforms that they look at is the United Nations. So the United Nations has always been the foundation, especially the UN Charter, that outlines international law. And for decades, the UN Charter has been violated by powerful actors, especially Western actors, as also actors in the East. But for the vast majority of the global South, this unequal relationship cannot continue. Therefore, the UN is having what is called the Summit for the Future in September, that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is convening to try and repurpose the United Nations in a very complex world. There are many complicated headwinds or structural forces that is impacting on global governance. From the different wars we see in the world today, Africa has the most conflicts. I mean, while there is significant focus on Ukraine and Palestine, Israel, Gaza, you're having 5 major conflicts in Africa: Sudan, the DRC, Mozambique, etc. And how are we managing this? Africa is literally falling off the map in terms of priorities. And then you had the 2 weeks ago, the Kenya protests. Now that is quite interesting because Kenya has been seen as one of the African champions, economic champions. It has followed a very much Western free market model for many years. And yet that model has failed purely because we haven't had equitable transformation in finance, in global trade. And Kenya has followed the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, to the T, all the prescriptions. So they've deregulated the financial sector, they've deregulated the labor market, they've moved into export orientation, they've exported agriculture and flowers and fresh produce, but they've never managed or industrialized their own country. And when the taxes came in and they had to fix the deficit of $2.6 billion, and the only way the president could do it or parliament could do it was to raise taxes on top of a population that is gone poor and in debt. And then you've had food inflation, and then you've had fuel inflation, and all these factors have confluenced, and then you're having these riots. These are actually food riots, and this is typical from the IMF playbook. And yet all of this is done under the name of democracy, promoting economic democracy, promoting multi-party democracy. And then where is the will of the people? Because President Ruto of Kenya came on a platform of equity of the people. He really was a kind of people's presidential candidate. And yet after 2 years, he had to implement these austerity measures that were imposed. So this whole notion of democracy, as your topic says, becomes a fallacy, because even though you're having candidates or leaders that are voted on behalf of the people on fairly modest economic development platforms, on equity, on justice, on fair trade, on job creation. None of these leaders, especially in Africa, have any policy space whatsoever to implement any broad-based economic programs. And I think this is the actual, in my view, the real fallacy of democracy. And therefore,
Yes, Ashraf.
people talk about the global south. The global south is literally at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yes, in fact, Mark, I see you are shaking your head, and perhaps just a comment from you in terms of what Ashraf is saying and talking about economic democracy. And we know capitalism, obviously, a cornerstone of democracy as well. But again, it's one of the fallacies. Obviously, it's like kind of a divide and rule policy: the haves and the have-nots. It is about protecting the capitalist institutions, and Ashraf alluded to the IMF, the World Bank, the corporates, right across the entire world. So this divide and rule policy, and when one looks at democracy in itself, by definition, is a good theory, but practically implemented by flawed people and flawed institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I could not, for 5 seconds, render any commentary on what Ashraf was saying as far as Africa. He's obviously head and shoulders above anything that I know. But in general, the principles that you just outlined, you're exactly right. This capitalism and obviously the war against the global South, as we refer to it, which is where the bulk of the world's resources are found, and then the capitalists, of course, they've created this system that keeps them at the top of the pyramid, while the rest of those residing in the global South have to do the bulk of the work with getting very little out of it. However, there are, as bleak as things appear to be, and certainly they are, there are positive signs. We see, large portions of the global South joining up with BRICS, or wanting to join up with BRICS, and to de-dollarize, to decouple themselves from the dollar and Western currency in general. You have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So you do see, the slaves are beginning to tug at the leash, and this is a good thing. This is a good thing because if it's one thing that, especially the West, with its institutionalized arrogance, this is something that I think we have to keep in mind. We have to take the long view of this, which is that the West, I mean, if we want to go back 1,000 years and look at what the West did to the Levant with the Crusades, the same arrogance that drove this campaign of mass murder against the people of the Levant on the part of Europe, it's the same mentality that exists today. These pathetic little brown people, who they can't manage their affairs the way that we do. We're going to go in and we're going to take what they own and maybe civilize them in the process. So there are positive signs. Of course, the other side of the coin, the negative side of that coin, is that the more that the West feels that its grip on power is being threatened, even if it's done in a democratic way. I mean, let's face it, BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, this is all taking place by democratic methods. People are dialoguing, they're voting, they're doing this in a very democratic way. So as much as the West loves to lecture the rest of the brown-skinned world, the global South, on democracy, nevertheless, if the democratic process is used to bring the West down, we can expect nothing less than the kind of violence that we have been witnessing take place in Gaza, except that it'll take place all over the world. Wherever the slaves decide to rise up against their masters, we will see the same kind of violence.
Yes, Mark. And Professor Nidal, I know we've been focusing on the global south with Ashraf, but knowing the Middle East as well as you do in terms of the outcomes of the both the French, the UK elections, and also America as well, because we know all these countries and Western Europe in general, and right across the entire world, have got keen interest in the politics of the Middle East and what plays out in the Middle East. What does all of this actually mean for the Middle East, and looking at the Gulf countries, looking at Saudi Arabia, and generally the Muslim world?
Well, actually, 2 points here. When we talk about the South, and mostly like when we talk about the democratic South, we see that actually the South has been really inflicted by the same ills and diseases that we have in Western democracies. You see, for example, like Brazil under populist, whatever his name, Bolsonaro, I think his name is. And we see right now, for example, like India under Modi. So even though that we have Brexit and other places, but it depends on how healthy, quote unquote, those democracies are in terms of human rights and other democratic means. That determines how healthy the South or the South democratic experiences are. So there is no guarantee that just because you have democracy that you're going to have a government that's really like healthy or in compliance with human rights. As far as the Middle East, I've always been of that position that Israel is a sister regime to all the Arab dictators. UAE made it very clear early on in the Gaza genocide that the fall of Israel would mean the fall of the Arab regimes in the Middle East. And I think it was the Bin Zayed, the foreign secretary or foreign affairs secretary of UAE, who made that statement, which he was actually absolutely true. What's happening right now, as we see, the streets are not happy in the Middle East. They're suppressed in the Gulf, especially like UAE. I just read the story about a student, a graduate during the commencement of the New York University campus in Abu Dhabi, who got deported just because he received his diploma while wearing the Palestinian kufiya. The same thing happening in Saudi Arabia and some other places around the Gulf area. And the same, of course, is in Egypt, Jordan, and Morocco, and other places, different degrees. I think all the bets right now are on Palestine and on the resistance, especially like out of Gaza, and how they manage that war, quote unquote, that's taking place in Palestine right now. Right now, even though that all the eyes are on the Gaza genocide, but we haven't right now actually very serious developments occurring also on the West Bank and on the other fronts in terms of what they call, in Arabic, we call it Wahdat Sahat, or the unity of the different battlefields. I think the next few months, 3-4 months coming up, and possibly if there was a war with Lebanon and so on and so forth, I think that's going to be very detrimental to the future of the Middle East. I think it's going to create a major instability for the dictatorship regimes. Most likely it's going to boost the energies on the streets in places like Jordan, probably like Egypt, probably like Morocco. And we would very highly likely destabilize these regimes. I think if we have a major development in a country like Jordan by itself, or any development, let's say, on the South Lebanon war front, I think it's going to change very much the Middle East, and by proxy, actually, even the Western democracies and the US and so forth. I don't think like a year from now, if we're having this conversation, I don't think we're going to be talking within the same world that we see today. I'm not hearing you, Inayet. I'm sure that probably others are not, maybe.
Okay, there we go. Ashraf, I know you've got a keen interest also in what happens in China and Russia as well. And, we have been talking about the global south, but also looking at BRICS, looking at BRICS Plus as well, and an extended version of BRICS as well. And on the other side, just looking at at Western Europe in general, looking at South Africa, our position as far as the outcomes is concerned, to a large extent, the South African elections, the results, the outcomes were outcomes that the West was hoping to achieve with this coalition government, because a lot of it would be in the interest of the United States of America and Western Europe. So just taking a look at where do China, Russia fit into this whole outcome of the elections, and also this leaning to the left of the political divide.
Yes, yes. I'm glad we finally got to China. It's an hour into the conversation. And China is the big elephant in the room purely because it's a completely different model. It does not follow a liberal democratic multi-party electoral model. And there was a time where in the 90s, when China entered the World Trade Organization, that the West and the US hoped that it would then follow political liberalization. But China has been very strategic. It's actually, the Confucius civilization is a very strategic civilization. And China, under the CCP, Communist Party, has managed one of the greatest economic and infrastructure development programs. It's unprecedented in history. So if you were just to look at the figures in the last 3 decades, 30 years since they joined the globalization free market economy, especially through the WTO, they have managed to get 400 million people out of poverty into the middle classes. It's unprecedented in world history. So there's a geo-economic shift to the east that's centered around China and the BRICS nations as well. Russia also very interesting by joining BRICS. These two powerful nations of the east, ex-socialist states, are now expanding this model towards an alternative model. But it's not a kind of East NATO, or it doesn't see itself as a political alliance. It's primarily an economic alliance dedicated towards deepening global reforms, broadening global governance, especially at the UN level, issues like fair trade, technology transfer. And yes, the de-dollarization is a huge program, and the early steps are beginning to be taken. We've seen this in the last 2 years. There has been common currencies, trading amongst nations in BRICS, commodities and trade. Those are very significant, and they're driven by economic necessity purely because the US, since the 2008 financial crisis, has not managed to reform. The US system, the political elites, did not manage to bring the necessary financial reforms and regulate global financial capital. And therefore, BRICS is taking this initiative because if the dollar is a reserve currency, it's very unstable. And we've seen this every year when the US goes into the budget. It's, I believe, Mark, I may be off mark, but I know it's 33 billion trade deficit, or the US government is 33 billion in deficit, in debt. And personal debt is high, inequalities are high. So the kind of US free market model is failing Americans themselves, firstly. Inequalities are high, social conflict is high. And nations of the global south are saying, hey, is this the model we want? No. And the answer is becoming more negative as the years go by. And in this vacuum, the Chinese model of state-led social market is becoming more viable, and they have the resources. The last figures are they're about $3 trillion in surplus, and they're using their surplus in major infrastructure programs, in soft power. And I think China has mastered the game of soft power and development power internationally. And they're winning a lot of friends in the global south, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America now. And it is definitely now in prime position to challenge the US. It is now an economic superpower, and it's on its way within the BRICS formations and other formations. Where we're heading now is a multipolar world order. And it's a new reality that's emerging very rapidly. And in there is this big debate around whether Western liberal democracy can actually manage to be dominant in the future. But in the medium term, there definitely is the rise of the East, led by China, Russia, and other BRICS nations. Very interesting times, and it will have major implications for democracy as we know it, because the new members of BRICS mainly are coming from the Middle East, but they also driven by economics more than politics. So it's an interesting dynamic that's playing itself out.
Well, on that thought, we're going to go for another ad break, and we'll come back and we'll just basically round up the discussion immediately after the ad break. So to all of you, we'll put you on hold.
Our brothers and sisters in Palestine are enduring unimaginable hardships. Ashraf aid teams are on the ground, delivering crucial aid to those in need. But we can't do it alone. Palestine is suffering and they need your help. Your support can make a world of difference. Visit www.ashrafulaid.org today and donate to bring hope, relief, and healing to those who are in need.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and free zakat calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
World-class financial services only at Sapphire Global, your financial partner. If you are looking for Islamic, Sharia, and ethical financial products, look no further. Sapphire Global offers a wide range of financial service offerings from short-term to life and investments. A full-service center with all financial requirements under one brand. Our highly skilled and experienced consultants are ready to help protect your financial future. Contact us on 041 001 0184 or visit our website on www.sapphireglobalfs.com. Sapphire Global is an authorized financial services provider.
When you give water, you're reaching out to drought-affected areas, bringing them to life. Fresh water to drink, to clean, and to grow. That's the power of water. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
Contact Lenasia Livestock and Poultry for all your sadaqah, akika and kurbani requirements. We offer clean, hygienic abattoir style and refrigeration facilities. Sheep, goats and cows are available at competitive market-related prices, direct to the public. We slaughter, slice and distribute on your behalf. But that's not all. Introducing Meat Masters Halal Butchery, our sister company situated on our farm in Lenasia. Unbeatable prices on lamb, beef and chicken. Lenasia Livestock and Poultry. Livestock is our business. We are Sanha approved. Telephone 011 857 1774. Call now.
Hey Gulam.
Yeah?
Did I return your lawnmower last month?
No, bhai, you didn't.
Oh no. Now what'll I do? I wanted to borrow it again, man.
With Rendry Jewelers, you won't have to borrow or lend because the prices are so well trimmed on all gold and diamond jewelry. Alternatively, we could remake your old jewelry into a brilliant new design. Visit Rendry Jewelers at 151 Stevens Lamini Road, Musgrave, Durban. Rendry Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media, your humanitarian broadcaster.
Well, we'll continue with the broadcast this evening, taking a look at the fallacy of democracy against the background of the outcome of the UK, the French, and looking ahead at the American elections with my guests, Mark Glenn, Professor Nidal, Sakr, and Ashraf Patel. Mark, just to continue, now we know in all democracies and in any countries, there are many people who don't have any option or who don't have any love of the options that are on offer. And this is the reason why you would find that a large percentage of people right across the entire world would actually stay away from the polling booths. They would stay away from voting. And they look at it as for various reasons. Also taking a look at a country like India, for example, where I mentioned earlier, it's a democracy, is a modern form of divide and rule. It's a technique that many politicians implement in terms of religion, in terms of caste, in terms of the economic divide. South Africa is a clear example where you have this huge gap between a rich and poor socioeconomic status. And all of this, at the end of the day, by politicians who exploit public funds to come into power. But once again, we know there is no shortage of people amongst us, the capacity to lead, good leadership, ethical leadership, moral leadership. But what we seem to be lacking is the means of actually seeking out these people and bringing them into public office.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very good point. And, I'll just tell you about my own experience. I have toyed often with the idea of running for office. The problem is that I know my market, meaning I know how people think, and I know the issues that should be discussed. I can't discuss them with them. Okay, they are concerned more with how much money they have in their pockets rather than the fact that literally at any moment their children could be dragged off to fight and die in World War III. So you're correct. It's we could solve the problems that we face in our own neighborhoods, in our own countries, and even on a global scale, if people cared enough to do it. And this brings us back to what we discussed earlier, which is finding a way to merge or marry principle with politics, since politics does attract the worst sorts of people who are essentially pathological narcissists. They're only concerned with their own well-being and their own advancement, and they're going to pretend to care about the well-being of the country in order to get to the top of the pyramid, so to speak. And it's always been this way. I do, though. I'll just say this. Ashraf was talking about the elephant in the room, the big elephant in the room, known as China. But there's also another elephant in the room that's even more powerful than that, and that is Islam itself. Now, I'm saying this as an American, as a Christian. I have a Christian wife. I have 10 Christian children. But I have studied Islam. I have been to Islamic countries. And the quality of moral character between what we would call the average Muslim versus the average Christian, the gulf between the two of them is as wide as the two oceans. And I was very heartened to hear the advertisements that you have on your channel. One of them offering Islamic financial services. We cannot discount what is happening right now, all the turmoil in the world, we cannot discount the direct role that the West, the Judeo-Christian West, okay, in trying to prevent Islam as a philosophy, as a governing principle in governments, in finance, in world order. They're trying to prevent this because right now it is the only rational solution. Again, I say this as a practicing Christian. It is the only rational solution to the world's political problems, the world's social problems, the world's economic problems. Is the application of these principles in the world. As much as we talk about it's a political game to see who can gain the most power, it's an economic gain. It's also an attempt to prevent the one antibiotic, okay, that would destroy capitalism, that would destroy inequality in the world, and that is Islam. That's why I say again, as a Christian living in a supposed Christian country, 3 cheers for Islam.
Thank you for that, Mark. And Prof. Nidal, just your comment as well, because the world is looking for solutions. The world is looking for answers. As Mark mentioned, Islam has got the answers. But sadly, even in the Muslim world, we've got well over 50 Muslim countries right across the entire world. We don't see those solutions, those Islamic solutions being implemented.
Well, I mean, I have to second what Mark said. There is more to the story, though. I think the idea of democracy is very tempting. However, the huge gap between theory and application is a big problem that we're faced with. On the other hand, is also like what version of democracy suits what nation, what culture, and at what stage. Yes, Islam is the solution, and it's the solution to so many problems, including governance, including finance, including social justice, and so on and so forth. And let's remember that the earlier years of Islam, when we had bay'ah, is actually an ultimate form of democracy as well. So Islam had always had democracy built in, but not democracy that's devoid from morals and ethics, and that's mostly focused on individual interests and the interests of capital and so on and so forth. We've had the experience that we had in Egypt, where I was actually oversaw putting the constitution, the revolution constitution, the one during the rule of Dr. Morsi, the only elected president in Egypt, and we had very, very promising example then. Unfortunately, when it looks like to a good part of the world where you have quote unquote democratic institutions, we had the funny term of military democracy. So, which is what we had in Turkey, for example, until like the last 5 or 10 years. We've had that in Pakistan. We still have it till today, where the military basically steps in whenever to detour democracy to whatever the ruling class sees fit, and so forth. So I think like we are in need, and I think we are witnessing. I'm very, very hopeful that we are learning as a human community worldwide. We're learning from all of the different deficiencies that we see in the Western democracies and other forms of democracies, even in the South, as I said, India, and so forth. That a new form of plural governance, or what you call democracy, is going to be emerging, definitely. I think Palestine, we had very good democratic, which is from all places, the election that we had back in 2005, 2006, which is really one of the reasons why we have the war today. I think that was one of the very promising examples that we had. And I think the war in Gaza is actually going to lead definitely into another stage or another phase of Palestinian democracy. And maybe like it's about time that we look at Palestine as the center of the Muslim world today, reintroducing democracy to us in different light and different ways. And we can finally have an example of a democracy that's like well-founded on principles and the higher values of the society at large and the human community around the world. I believe that actually as a human community all over the world, we both have the same concerns. We both have the ultimate goals and ideals and value systems, except that, the Western machine of propaganda and the political capital and so forth is what masks, or what actually contaminates the democratic experience in the West. But I think we will have an example coming out over the Middle East and mostly Palestine in particular, that we reintroduce democracy to us the way it should be.
Yes, Ashraf, just your thoughts on an alternative, because there was, at one point in time, there was what is termed the red peril, where communism was seen as a threat to Western hegemony. And that after the demise of communism, we saw the green peril beginning to emerge, and the green peril obviously referring to Islam and the Islamic ideology, because Islam stands against whatever democracy stands for in terms of capitalism and all the other ills of capitalism. So just your thoughts on an alternative.
Yes, look, the global condition is such that all alternatives are welcomed. And so with the rise of global south, new centers of power, multipolarity, there's also talk of a civilizational kind of alternatives. Obviously, at this point in time, China and the Confucius civilization is leading purely because they have scaled and really understood globalization. They've mastered globalization, all the tools, the norms, the rules, the regulations, and they've made the global system work for them as a nation state. Unfortunately, in the Islamic world, you have 53 nation states, and they're all trapped in different kinds of nationalisms, and they definitely trapped in the unequal hegemonies and all the corruption that goes with the nation state, the dependencies with technologies from other zones, or the Western zone in particular, and especially cultural. So while Islam as a faith is very strong at the ritual level, culturally, most of the Muslim nation states and the youth in particular are still looking to the West or Western consumerism. And another thing, that besides being trapped in the nation state, all these Muslim nation states are also competing with each other. So you have hegemonies or regional hegemonies. You have Turkey that is trying to impose a Ottoman hegemony in the Middle East. You have Iran that's trying to impose a Persian hegemony. You have Saudi Arabia and others that are imposing an Arab hegemony. So they're competing, they hardly cooperate. So that is the big challenge. Can they get the Islamic values as a unifying force? And in throughout the Muslim world, you go to any country from Pakistan to Egypt to Iran to Turkey, the nation state identity is prime. Islam as an identity is merely ritualistic, and therefore it has the potential, but it won't be able to scale as, let's say, the Chinese Confucius model is scaling today. China is just one nation, one state, one civilization, one language. And today it's on the cusp of world superpower status. The Muslim world has all the resources, and it hasn't managed to scale. Yet 60% of the Muslim world is living in poverty, dire poverty. 60% of the world's conflicts are in Muslim zones or nation states. So the situation is really dire. So we can only hope and pray, but we really need to be quite realistic of the current crisis in the Muslim world. I know it's a negative, but it's a realistic view. It's an objective reality, as they say.
Well, shukran for that, Ashraf. I know we've come to the end of the broadcast, and just very quickly, Mark, Prof. Nidal and Ashraf, I'm going to go through just to get some final thoughts, starting with you, Mark.
Yeah, I think at this point, what each of us should do, and I'm talking about the four of us together, and really all people of goodwill throughout the world, is to not fall into that trap of seduction that has been discussed here on the program about allowing our minds to be colonized. You know, one of the things that I do is I try to liberate my fellow Christians concerning their misconceptions and misbeliefs about Islam, and to tell them, you know, that listen, you know, what you're being told is just simply not true. The Muslims are the closest friends that the Christians have, and I think that if we apply this model across the board of finding commonalities without having to sacrifice our principles, that we will be able to get on top of this. As the Quran says, you know, the evildoers they plot, but God is the wisest of plotters.
Thank you for that, Mark. Prof. Nidal?
We all owe it to Gaza that it showed us the divide between the people and the political establishment, especially like in quote-unquote Western democracies. I'm still a firm believer that 2024 is the year where this is going to change. When we talk about hegemony in the Middle East or in much of the world, we're talking about Western hegemony, whether it came in form of Israeli occupation or dictatorship occupation of Sisi, Saud, Zaid, and so forth. I think Gaza is going to reset the compass to people all over the world. You know, to me, the American streets and the American campuses is no different than, you know, protests that we see, let's say, in the West Bank or any part of the Muslim world. We are all united in humanity. And I think we're all looking for leadership. And I don't think there is any more clear example of the moral leadership and the heroic leadership than the Palestinian resistance that we see in Gaza, in the West Bank, inshallah, in Palestine 48, and the entire region. And I believe it's going to be a matter of a couple of years. We're going to see the whole world changing, and it will all start from Palestine, as it always has been the case.
Inshallah. Ashraf, the last word from you.
Thanks. I definitely agree with my fellow panelists. The world is moving decisively into a multipolar world order, and that means different philosophies, different economic models, especially finance models, different cultural models, as well as different views of engagement, people to people, globalization, rooted in values. And I definitely think a multiplicity of different civilizations in the world today, from the Confucius to the Eurasian, to the Islamic, to the Hindu, to the African civilizations. All of these civilizations have got very important contributions to make in all aspects of life. And I think definitely the Western system, let's call it the dominant Western colonial system in the last 5 centuries, is now in a decline, a structural decline, and the rise of the rest is now reality. And how we engage with this over the decades is going to be important. And as progressives, I think there's an important role for all of us to make a positive contribution to this unfolding new order that's emerging.
Well, it certainly is. And for your positive contributions tonight to our panelists, Mark Glenn, Professor Nidal, Sakr, and to Ashraf Patel, Jazakallah Shukran to all of you for your time with us this evening right here on Salam Media. So all the best to all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa
alaikum assalam wa barakatuh. Nice meeting you all.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Nights with myself, Inayet Wadee, and I must say a most absorbing discussion tonight, taking a deeper look at the fallacy of democracy. And it's going to be very, very interesting. We've seen the results of a number of elections that have taken place throughout the year across the world, and all eyes will be on the United States of America. And with that, I'm going to be leaving you from myself and the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.